Hello class, here's my second lecture for this week on voice and why it matters in writing. So I wanted to cover this real quick for you guys, and that way you understand what I'm asking for the second discussion. So let's get into it. So what is voice exactly? What am I talking about? Voice is, as mentioned here, a distinct personality or style. It is the way you write your papers. And having strong voice can help, just like everything else, just like metaphors, help you be more rhetorical, more persuasive, able to connect with your audience as much as possible, right? Think of your voice in writing as a signature, right? It's yours, it's your own. When someone sees it, they understand that, oh, this person is the one that wrote it. And if people like your voice and people enjoy your writing, it's probably because you have a very strong voice to share. Think of it this way. Peter Elbow defines voice as the sound of the writer. It's the way you sound when you write your work. So you may have two completely different subjects that you write about, right? But you can still understand this from you because you are able to hear, in this sense, metaphorically hear, your voice from that piece of paper, from that piece of work, right? Think of it as a fingerprint. It is wholly your own. Even if it's a different subject, it doesn't matter. You know it's from you. And if you have a favorite author that you like to read from, or someone that writes stuff online from a website you always like to frequent, it might be because you like their personality, their style, their voice in their writing. You enjoy the way they write. As such, you try to follow them as much as possible. And that's how they were able to get you to pay attention to what they had to say. So why does it matter? Voice matters for several different reasons. And before I go any further, let me clarify this. Just like metaphors, I'm not forcing you guys to use voice. I'm not saying you gotta use voice. You have to make sure your writing sticks out. I would like it, of course, for your writing to stick out because that makes writing more interesting, but I'm not grading you in any sense of the word. But I do want you to be aware of it, much like you're aware of rhetoric now, right? Much like you're aware of metaphors. I want you to be aware of how you can use voice to be better at rhetoric, to use it in a sense to connect with your audience. Anyways, why it's important, of course, is because it makes things more interesting. It makes your writing more engaging, right? It shows your individuality, your enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is an important part, especially when it comes to writing. Like I might have mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again here. If you're not enthusiastic about what you write, why should the reader be enthusiastic about reading your work? There's nothing worse than reading something that the author clearly couldn't care less about, right? It's why I have the assignments that you've done so far. You have been given choice in the assignments, right? I allowed 10 different ads to choose from, right? Choose one of the ads that spoke the most to you. I allowed you to pick a scenario where you wanted to argue for whatever you wanted to argue against whatever audience you wanted to do. And the same thing, of course, will happen in your third project. You will be allowed to pick your subject because I want you to care about what you pick. The more passion you have for your subject, the easier it is to get voice. The easier it is to show your enthusiasm, your individuality. When you have a strong voice, you make sure that you use every word, that you're able to connect your audience with whatever subject you're trying to convince them of, or trying to explain why it's important for them to pay attention, right? You're able to grab their interest and keep their interest. And here's the thing, especially in our digital environment, if you're able to write something once, that's great, awesome, that's phenomenal. But you want to continue people to keep coming back, right? Especially if it's very important that you may be creating a blog or something like that, right? Maybe it's a cooking blog, whatever. You're creating something, right, every week. Well, you got to make sure you're engaging them every week, right? That you have a strong voice that your audience likes, that they'll come back for more. Ultimately, a strong voice is able to connect with your audience through your emotions, right? You want them to feel a certain way. This is related to pathos. And voice helps you do that. You're able to connect with them in this way, right? So when a paper is full of voice, the reader feels as if the author is talking to them directly, that they're not someone that's not important, but what they have to say is something that is important to the reader. This is especially important if you enjoy what you're reading, and that's what you're trying to make people do when you write whatever it is that you're trying to write. So when you listen to writing that either makes you laugh, scares you, basically if it makes you feel an emotion, that's voice for sure. Shows personality, that's a big one, because your personality will stay consistent throughout any type of paper you write, right? Has a lot of energy. Oh, that's so important. I'm sure all of us have read something that just has no energy. It's like a technical manual, right? Like a manual setting up a coffee pot or a microwave or something. You're like, oh, this is just so boring. Just get to it, right? That's because it lacks energy, because it's just meant to be informative, not necessarily engaging, right? Sounds like a real person. If it sounds like something someone would say, like an actual person, not a machine, for certain that has a voice. Sounds like a friend talking to a friend, almost the same thing. Is entertaining. Possible, considering what you have to do for whatever your topic is. But if you're able to entertain or engage your audience, that's great. That's a strong sign of voice, and stays with you. That's a great one. If your reader keeps thinking about what you wrote about after they read it, they just don't immediately dismiss it. That's how you know you have a really good paper, and you have a really not only a good paper, but you also have a very strong voice. So how do you find your own voice? Honestly, it just takes practice. Some of you already, I can tell by your discussions and what you've written so far for your first 2 assignments, you have voice, hands down, easily. I don't. The voice that you do have, though, might not be as engaging as you would like, but you all have it. If you read back your stuff, if you look at what you've written so far in your discussions, in your papers, you'll notice you write a certain way. And how well you're able to use that tool will help you become a better rhetorician, a better person at communicating with other people. So, but here's some advice and to further develop that voice, to further make it a tool in your arsenal known as persuasion. So, 1, don't ever be afraid to share your thoughts and opinions. Don't be afraid to let your voice be heard. So you have an argument to make, especially if you're asked for your argument. Make sure you're confident about what thoughts and opinions you want to express. Of course, this goes along with the other parts of rhetoric. Make sure you're also logical in your thoughts and opinion. But for the most part, if you're making an argument, you want to be passionate about that argument. As such, you want to make sure you are confident in sharing your thoughts and opinions. Don't hide your true self and have fun with your write. That, of course, depends on you, the individual, on how well you write, or not how well you write, but how much fun you have writing or not. But the idea is be true to yourself. Just write the way you're comfortable with, right? Write confidently with the writing you know. Pretend that you're talking directly to the reader, not just a multiple bland, faceless audience, right? Pretend you're trying to convince somebody in front of you, right? Not that you write colloquially, but you will kind of think like, oh, what would someone need from me to really understand where I'm coming from, and so they understand why I feel the way I do. Make sure your writing is natural, not outside your scope of understanding. That's kind of goes along with writing. Don't hide your true self. Don't use words you don't really know how to use, or words that are outside your scope of understanding. It doesn't come off well. For one, it kind of hurts your ethos because it's clear that you just found like a new word and you're really trying it out. Just use words that you're comfortable with. The more you write, the easier it'll become for you to use words outside of your scope and really start to get to learn them and start to use them in your writing naturally. And that's the idea. You naturally use these words. So just write what you know. Don't really need to go outside that scope. So that goes along with this next one. Avoid the words that you normally wouldn't use. And of course, like I've been saying, write with confidence. Don't ever say stuff like I feel or I think this is how it should be. We already know this is your opinion. We know this is an argument. Just say it, right? We should have more windmills instead of saying I think we should have more windmills, or I feel like we should have more brakes. Whatever. Just say we should have more brakes because of this. Don't ever say I feel or I think. It just doesn't work out too well, and your voice becomes weakened and your credibility becomes weakened, as if you're not too sure of your own argument. So when you listen for voice, you know it's strong if it's confident, if it's enthusiastic, if it has emotion, whatever emotion that may be, right? If it has personality, remember, that personality, you guys already have it. I'll tell you that right now. If you want to read more, you know you have a strong voice. If it's different or unusual, in certain cases, to have it, if it's being unique in that sense, might be a good thing, of course, as long as you're rhetorical about being different or unusual. If it's weak, it's just the facts, boring, dull, lost of advance, want to stop reading, no energy. Basically, like I said, a technical manual, right? A manual you would get with an appliance. If your paper's like that, you definitely are going to have a hard time connecting with your audience. In certain instances, though, it's important, of course, to kind of be in this fashion. Think of it this way. If it's a social science paper, like in English, art, sociology, whatever, you're probably going to want to stick over here, right, with strong voice. But if it's biology, chemistry, engineering, it's going to be over here. It's just the nature of the beast in that sense, right? It's the nature of that profession, to be scientific, to be logical, to get to the point, even if it's not the most engaging writing. And that's fine, because that's what that profession needs. That's what that subject needs. However, in my class and in spaces where you can use voice, you definitely want to try to go over on this side, right? So remember your target audience and purpose. Always, always, always understand your audience. This goes along with, writing for the sciences versus writing for the social sciences. Understanding your audience will help you understand how much or how little voice you should use. And your purpose should let you know exactly how to cater to those audiences, correct? This is just rhetoric 101 again. And voice works along with rhetoric. Like I said, you don't necessarily need to use voice in the sense that I'm not grading for it, but it is a strong, important tool in your arsenal. But you need to understand your rhetorical situation, your decorum in which you're writing. As such, the rhetorical triangle will help you along with this. As always, and think of this as ethos, logos, pathos, right? Ethos is you, the speaker or writer, right here. The subject right here is, what is the subject? Is it pathos? No, it's logos. Logos and audience is pathos. So it's ethos, logos, pathos, right? So ethos is you as a speaker, writer, setting up your credibility. Logos is whatever logical argument you're trying to make, and pathos is you trying to connect with the audience, right? And this is inside, though, you notice, is circle, right? Don't worry about the genre here, just this is something different. But the circle, think of it more of the rhetorical situation, the decorum of the situation, right? And intention, purpose will let you know exactly what you need to do to connect with your audience and what kind of voice or how little or how much you'll need to use. Now, voice versus tone. Tone is just a subset of voice, much like similes are a subset of metaphors. And a tone is think of it as like the way you would change the paper depending on what you want the audience to think about. So voice is the personality, right? And your personality doesn't really change that much from paper to paper because that's what makes it voice, right? It makes it something that you'll always have and always use. However, tone can change all the time. If the personality stays the same, the tone or the mood of the paper can change, right? So maybe your mood when you're writing this is angry, or it's silly, or it's sarcastic, right? While the voice would always be passionate, which is totally fine. And it just depends, of course, on your subject. Just realize that, right? Voice will, if you have strong voice, will always stay the same, but tone can totally change because it's a different subject altogether. Of course it's going to change, right? And depending on your audience, maybe having a silly tone isn't a good idea, right? And maybe having a biting tone or a very critical tone is a good idea because that's what you were trying to do, criticize something or someone. And of course, though, when using voice, much like I mentioned before, it's not really appropriate for all situations. Like I said, very scientific writing will never have voice. Much like you have very low pathos in scientific writing, you really won't have much voice in scientific writing. And here's some examples, right? Lab reports, statement of purposes, exactly stuff like that. And of course, your audience will always determine if you should or shouldn't use voice. But the key idea when it comes to voice is that you have to practice. You have to practice writing. If you really want to engage your readers, if you really want to make sure you stay with your readers, you have to write. And the way you develop your voice is by first identifying it. And the easiest way to do that is to reread your stuff. It's another reason why I have you revise. It's another reason why I have other people look at your papers, because trust me, if they read all 3 of your papers, they would understand that this is coming from you, from a single individual, because you always have the same voice. And you all have voice. I can already tell you that right now. It just needs to be further developed. But of course, it's up to you, but I want to make sure you guys understand that it is there. It's another tool to be used, much like anything else when it comes to persuasion. So that's the idea about voice. It's something to be aware of, that I want you guys to be aware of, along with metaphors, because along with metaphors, voice can be a very strong way of connecting with your audience. After watching this video, please do the discussion tied to this video, and since now you've seen the video, you should just be just fine. But there's also directions on that discussion. Otherwise, for now, let's call that good, and I will see you in the next lecture.